The target was 500 yards. Young Marines prepared their state-of-the-art equipment, while 90-year-old William Bill Harrison picked up his 1943 Springfield rifle. 30 seconds later, those elite warriors would learn what World War II really meant. Because some skills don't fade with age, they only get sharper. The annual Memorial Day shooting exhibition at Camp Pendleton drew hundreds of spectators eager to watch the Marine Corps demonstrate their marksmanship prowess. The event showcased the evolution of military precision, shooting featuring Marines using the latest in rifle technology and training methods developed over decades of modern warfare. Families with children, veterans of various ages, and curious civilians filled the bleachers, their excited conversations creating a buzz of anticipation. Bill Harrison attended every year, not as a participant, but as a quiet observer who understood better than most what the ceremony represented. At 90, Bill moved slowly but deliberately, his weathered hands steady on the walking cane that had replaced the rifle he'd once carried through Pacific battlefields. Most spectators saw him as just another elderly veteran, paying respects to fallen comrades, unaware that the man in the faded American Legion cap had once been one of the deadliest marksmen in the Pacific theater. His eyes, still sharp beneath bushy white eyebrows, missed nothing as he watched the preparations for the demonstration. Each movement of the young Marines was noted and silently evaluated by a man who had learned his skills in the most demanding combat conditions imaginable. The slight tilt of his head, an occasional nod, revealed an expert's assessment hidden behind the unassuming exterior of an elderly veteran. Staff Sergeant David Torres led a squad of 6 elite marksmen, each representing different aspects of current Corps marksmanship doctrine. At 35, Torres had served multiple tours in Iraq and Afghanistan, earning commendations for his shooting skills and leadership. He stood ramrod straight, chest forward, the embodiment of Marine Corps pride and confidence. His equipment represented millions of dollars in research and development, precision rifles that could calculate wind drift and bullet drop automatically. Corporal Jason Mitchell, who carried an M27 infantry automatic rifle equipped with advanced optics that allowed him to engage targets at ranges previous generations of Marines could only dream of reaching. Fresh-faced with a crew cut so precise it might have been measured with scientific instruments, Mitchell embodied the new generation of Marines. His training had emphasized technology integration and systematic approaches to precision shooting that left little to individual interpretation. This system can calculate 16 environmental factors simultaneously. Mitchell explained to the gathering crowd, holding his rifle with the reverence of a believer. The ballistic computer accounts for everything from humidity to the Earth's rotation. Lance Corporal Sophia Roberts brought similar credentials, having graduated top of her class from the Marine Corps Scout Sniper School. Her rifle featured a suppressor bipod and night vision capabilities that made her effective under any condition. Her quiet confidence spoke of someone who trusted her equipment and training implicitly. 3 other Marines completed the team, each with specializations ranging from extreme long-range shooting to rapid target acquisition. Together, they represented the pinnacle of modern military marksmanship, their equipment and training honed to near perfection through endless drills and technological refinement. The demonstration typically featured known distance precision shooting, with Marines engaging targets at 200, 300, and 500 yards, while commentators explained the technical aspects of modern marksmanship to civilian audiences. This year's event included a special challenge engaging reactive steel targets that required not just accuracy but timing and adaptability. As the Marines prepared their equipment, going through elaborate setup procedures that included laser range finding and ballistic calculations, Bill watched from the spectator area with the quiet intensity of someone evaluating technical performance. His observations went unnoticed until a conversation changed everything. "Young man," Bill called to Corporal Mitchell during a break between demonstrations, "you're holding that rifle like you don't trust it." Mitchell looked up sharply, surprised by criticism from someone he assumed was just another civilian observer. The Marine's expression shifted from confusion to mild irritation as he registered the source of the comment. "The rifle's fine, sir." Mitchell responded, his tone professionally courteous but clipped. "It's a precision instrument worth more than most people's cars." Bill nodded thoughtfully, his weathered hands resting on his cane. "I'm sure it is, but instruments don't make marksmen. Training and trust do." The comment drew attention from other Marines who gathered around with the casual curiosity of professionals encountering unexpected expertise. Their expressions betrayed a mixture of respect for the elderly veteran and skepticism about his outdated knowledge. Staff Sergeant Torres approached with polite but firm authority. His combat ribbons and immaculate uniform projected the confidence of someone accustomed to being the expert in any conversation about marksmanship. "Sir, we appreciate your interest," Torres said, "but this is a professional demonstration. Our Marines have undergone extensive training with this equipment." Bill's smile carried decades of memories. "Son, I've been watching your demonstration for an hour. Your equipment is impressive, but your fundamentals need work. Half your group is fighting their rifles instead of working with them." The suggestion that their technique was flawed drew defensive responses from several Marines. Lance Corporal Roberts stepped forward with barely concealed irritation. "With respect, sir," she said, emphasizing the honorific just enough to make it clear she felt it unearned, "we've trained at the highest level. Our marksmanship scores exceed historical averages by significant margins." Bill studied the young Marines with the calculating gaze of someone who'd trained soldiers under conditions where failure meant death. His eyes lingered on their stances, the way they held their weapons, the positioning of their hands. "Your scores might be high," Bill said quietly, "but your understanding is shallow. You're shooting at paper targets under controlled conditions. Real marksmanship is different." The comments sparked heated discussion among the Marines who'd dedicated years to mastering their craft according to modern military doctrine. Their training emphasized systematic approaches and technological solutions to marksmanship challenges concepts they'd assumed represented the pinnacle of shooting development. From the edge of the group, Private First Class Ryan Cooper observed the exchange with growing interest. Unlike his peers, Cooper's expression showed curiosity rather than defensiveness. His eyes moved between Bill and his commanding officer, his gaze lingering thoughtfully on the elderly veteran. "Sir," Cooper said to Torres quietly, "I think I recognize him." Torres dismissed Cooper with a slight shake of his head, focusing instead on addressing the situation directly. "Sir, what's your background with marksmanship?" Torres asked. "Are you a competitive shooter or instructor?" The question hung in the air as spectators began to gather around the unexpected confrontation. Bill's answer was delivered with understated simplicity. "First Marine Division, Guadalcanal through Okinawa. Spent 3 years learning that when your equipment fails and your life depends on one-shot fundamentals are all that matter." The revelation hit like a physical blow. The elderly man they'd dismissed as another curious spectator was a combat veteran whose marksmanship had been tested under conditions none of them could imagine. His experience predated their entire military doctrine by 70 years. The Marines exchanged glances that mixed respect with uncertainty. As Torres processed this information, Cooper stepped away from the group, pulling out his phone and typing rapidly. His eyes kept darting back to Bill with growing recognition. Bill's mind drifted back to Bougainville in 1943, to the suffocating heat and constant danger of the jungle. The memory was so vivid he could almost smell the rotting vegetation and feel the weight of his rifle. The rain had been relentless, turning everything to mud and rendering modern optics useless. But the Springfield in his hands had remained reliable, its wooden stock warm to the touch even in the downpour. For 3 days, Bill had played a deadly game of cat and mouse with a Japanese sniper named Yamato. Intelligence had identified him as one of their best, credited with killing 17 Marines as they established their beachhead. Both men knew the jungle, both understood patience, both recognized they were engaged in a duel where the first mistake would be the last. On the 3rd day, with ammunition running low and his unit depending on him to clear the way for their advance, Bill had learned the most valuable lesson of his career from Sergeant Frank Miller, a grizzled veteran of World War I. "The rifle is an extension of your body," Miller had told him. "Not a tool, not a weapon, but a part of you. Your heartbeat, your breath, your thoughts all flow through it. Trust that connection more than any sight or scope." When Yamato finally revealed himself, firing at another Marine and giving away his position, Bill had taken his shot without conscious calculation. The rifle had become an extension of his will, the bullet finding its mark through intuition, honed by countless hours of practice and the pressure of genuine consequence. When ammunition is limited and the enemy is hunting you, Bill had told his fellow Marines afterward, every round must count. Back in the present, Bill continued quietly. "You want to see the difference between modern shooting and wartime marksmanship? Give me that Springfield over there and I'll show you what real precision looks like." The Springfield M1903, he indicated, was a museum piece, part of the historical weapons display that showed the evolution of Marine Corps small arms. The rifle had been manufactured in 1943 and represented technology from an era before advanced optics, precision ammunition, and computer-assisted targeting systems. Corporal Mitchell voiced what everyone was thinking. "Sir, that rifle doesn't have optics or adjustable components. The iron sights are fixed, and the ammunition isn't match grade. How can you compete with modern precision equipment?" Bill approached the Springfield with reverence that came from intimate familiarity. His hands caressed the worn wood stock with the tenderness one might show to an old friend. "This rifle and others like it won a war, son," Bill said, his voice low, but carrying authority born of experience. "It doesn't need computers or fancy optics. It just needs someone who understands shooting instead of equipment management." The challenge that emerged was spontaneous but inevitable. The Marines would demonstrate their capabilities using modern equipment and training. Then Bill would attempt the same course of fire using the vintage Springfield with iron sights and standard military ammunition. The 500-yard targets were steel silhouettes that required not just accuracy, but precision timing to engage effectively. Cooper returned to the group, his expression now one of subdued excitement. He positioned himself near Torres and whispered something that made the staff sergeant glance sharply at Bill. As the parameters of the challenge took shape, Bill's mind returned to Okinawa in 1945. The memory was crystal clear, untouched by the decades that had passed since. He could feel the rain beating down on his helmet, hear the sporadic rifle fire, and explosions in the distance. His unit had been pinned down by a Japanese position on a ridge that commanded the entire approach. The commanding officer had ordered Bill and his spotter, Jack Winters, to eliminate the threat. The conditions had been brutal, strong winds driving rain, and no technological aids to compensate for the elements. Bill had studied the terrain, felt the wind on his face, and calculated the shot using nothing but experience and instinct. The distance had been just over 500 yards, the margin for error measured in inches. Jack had whispered the wind call, his voice barely audible over the rain. "Full value gusting to 20 knots. You'll need to hold right." Bill had made the necessary adjustments, controlling his breathing as he prepared for the shot that would save dozens of Marines waiting to advance. When he pulled the trigger, the rifle's recoil had felt like an extension of his own heartbeat, the bullet flying true despite the challenging conditions. The shot had eliminated the threat, allowing the company to advance and ultimately secure their objective. But the cost had been high. As they relocated, an enemy artillery barrage had caught them in the open. Jack had pushed Bill into a shell crater, taking shrapnel that would eventually claim his life. Dying in a field hospital hours later, Jack had extracted a promise. "Take what we learned here home, Bill. Too many good men won't get that chance." Bill had nodded, gripping his friend's hand. "I swear it, Jack. These skills won't die with us." Back at Camp Pendleton, Staff Sergeant Torres established the rules clearly. 5 shots at 500 yards, scored on hits versus misses rather than group size. The Marines will shoot first, demonstrating their capabilities with full modern equipment. Then Mr. Harrison will attempt the same course using the historical rifle. The formality of the address wasn't lost on anyone. The casual dismissal of earlier had been replaced with a caution born of uncertainty. Something in Cooper's whispered message had changed Torres's assessment of the elderly veteran. The Marines approached the challenge with systematic precision. Mitchell used his advanced optics to range the targets and calculate holdover values based on environmental conditions. His shooting was competent and controlled, achieving 4 hits out of 5 attempts with equipment designed to eliminate human error from the equation. Roberts' performance was similar, using her training to methodically engage each target with technological assistance that provided significant advantages over iron sight shooting. Her final score was 4 hits, representing solid marksmanship that met current Marine Corps standards. The other Marines achieved comparable results with scores ranging from 3 to 4 hits out of 5 attempts. Their performance represented competent application of modern training methods and equipment designed to maximize success rates under various conditions. When they finished, there was a general sense of satisfaction among the team. They'd performed well, demonstrating the effectiveness of their training and technology. Even if the old veteran managed to hit the targets, he couldn't possibly match their speed or consistency. Bill's approach was completely different. He examined the Springfield with the practiced efficiency of someone conducting a pre-combat inspection, checking the action sights and ammunition, with movements that suggested muscle memory developed over decades. "May I have a moment to check the sights?" he asked, his tone making it clear this was a courtesy rather than a request for permission. Torres nodded. "Of course, sir. Take whatever time you need." Bill worked the bolt action smoothly, ensuring the rifle was functioning properly. His hands moved with surprising dexterity for a man his age, each motion efficient and purposeful. He checked the iron sights, making minor adjustments based on a knowledge so ingrained it had become instinct. His preparation took less than 2 minutes compared to the extensive setup procedures the Marines had employed. When Bill stepped to the firing line, something fundamental changed in his bearing. The elderly veteran disappeared, replaced by someone whose presence commanded attention without demanding it. Cooper noticed it first. "Look at his stance," he whispered to Roberts. "Perfect textbook form, but old school." Bill's posture had indeed transformed. His back straightened, shoulders relaxed, yet firm feet positioned with textbook precision. The tremor that had occasionally affected his hands when holding his cane was nowhere to be seen. His grip on the rifle was confident and natural, as though the Springfield was truly an extension of himself. His shooting stance was indeed textbook perfect, but from an era when marksmanship was taught as art rather than science. He settled into position with the fluid grace of someone who had performed these actions thousands of times under the most demanding conditions imaginable. The crowd fell silent as Bill prepared for his first shot. Even those who had come simply to enjoy a day's entertainment sensed they were witnessing something extraordinary. The Marines watched with professional interest, now their earlier skepticism giving way to genuine curiosity. Bill took a deep breath, then slowly exhaled as he aligned the iron sights on the first target. The distance was challenging enough with modern optics, making it all the more impressive that he was attempting it with technology nearly 8 decades old. His first shot rang out with the distinctive crack of the Springfield's 30-06 cartridge, followed immediately by the metallic clang of steel being struck dead center. The sound drew surprised murmurs from spectators who hadn't expected such immediate success with iron sights at 500 yards. Without rushing, Bill worked the bolt, chambering another round with smooth efficiency. His breathing remained controlled, his focus absolute. The second shot struck with identical precision, followed by 3 more that created a rhythm of rifle crack and target strike that seemed almost mechanical in its consistency. When Bill lowered the Springfield, all 5 targets had been engaged with perfect center hits that demonstrated understanding of long-range marksmanship that transcended equipment or training methods. The silence that followed was profound. Young Marines who had spent years mastering modern techniques had been outshot by a 90-year-old man using equipment older than their grandparents. The demonstration wasn't just about marksmanship. It was about the difference between learned skills and combat-forged abilities. As the reality of what they'd witnessed sank in, the crowd erupted in applause. Bill accepted their recognition with a slight nod, his expression unchanged as he carefully cleared the Springfield and returned it to safe condition. Staff Sergeant Torres approached Bill with the respect one warrior offered to another. His earlier defensiveness had vanished, replaced by professional curiosity and genuine admiration. "Sir, that was extraordinary shooting," Torres said. "Where did you develop that level of precision?" Bill began cleaning the Springfield with practiced efficiency, his hands moving through the ritual with muscle memory that decades of civilian life hadn't erased. "Bougainville mostly," he replied, his voice matter-of-fact. "When Japanese snipers are trying to kill you and ammunition is limited, you learn to make every shot count. Can't rely on equipment when you're fighting for your life." The young Marines gathered around Bill, their earlier defensiveness replaced by genuine desire to learn from someone whose abilities had been proven under ultimate conditions. They asked questions about technique, training methods, and mental approach to precision shooting. Bill answered each question with patient detail, sharing insights earned through combat experience that no peacetime training could provide. His explanations emphasized fundamentals over technology, understanding over equipment, and the mental discipline required for precision under extreme stress. Even Torres found himself taking mental notes as Bill explained the relationship between breathing trigger control and accuracy. "The problem with your stance, Corporal," Bill said to Mitchell, "is that you're fighting the natural recoil. You're so focused on controlling the rifle that you're creating tension. The rifle becomes an adversary instead of a partner." Mitchell nodded, recognition dawning in his eyes. I was trained to minimize variables to control every aspect of the shot. Control comes from understanding, not force, Bill replied. Your body knows what to do if you train it properly and then trust it to perform. As their impromptu lesson continued, Cooper's attention was drawn to the parking area where a black Humvee with command flags had arrived. He excused himself from the group and jogged toward the vehicle, his posture shifting to formal military bearing as he approached. The Marines continued their discussion with Bill, unaware of Cooper's departure or the significance of the vehicle that had arrived. Roberts was demonstrating her usual shooting stance with Bill, making small corrections to her arm position. Feel the difference, Bill asked as he adjusted her elbow slightly. That small change distributes tension more evenly. You'll be able to hold steady longer without muscle fatigue. Roberts nodded, surprise evident in her expression as she felt the immediate improvement. That's significantly better. Why isn't this taught in sniper school? Some lessons can only be passed directly from one generation to another, Bill explained. They lose something when translated into manuals and formal instruction. Their conversation was interrupted by the sound of footsteps approaching from behind. The Marines turned and immediately straightened to attention, their bodies responding automatically to the presence of senior command. Bill turned more slowly, his civilian status allowing him the freedom to move at his own pace. As he faced the newcomer, his expression remained composed, but a slight tightening around his eyes suggested recognition. General James Harrington, Commandant of the Marine Corps, stood before them in full-dress uniform. At his side, Cooper maintained perfect military bearing, but couldn't entirely suppress the look of satisfaction in his eyes. At ease, Harrington said to the Marines before turning his full attention to Bill. His next action stunned everyone present. The highest-ranking officer in the Marine Corps rendered a perfect salute to the elderly veteran. Lieutenant Harrison, Harrington said, his voice carrying clearly across the now silent range. It's an honor to finally meet you, sir. My father served under your command at Okinawa. Bill returned the salute with the precision that only comes from years of military service, his weathered hand steady at his brow. The honor is mine, General. Bill replied, his voice steady despite the emotion evident in his eyes. Your father was a fine Marine. He saved many lives that day on the ridge. Torres and his team exchanged confused glances, struggling to process what they were witnessing. The elderly man they had initially dismissed was being treated with extraordinary respect by the Commandant himself. Do you know who you've been speaking with, Staff Sergeant? Harrington asked Torres, though his eyes never left Bill. Torres shook his head. Only that he's a World War II veteran, sir, 1st Marine Division. Harrington's smile held both respect and something else, something that looked remarkably like awe. This is Lieutenant William Harrison, Harrington announced, his voice carrying to the gathered crowd. Recipient of the Medal of Honor, awarded 60 years after his actions at Okinawa due to recently declassified operations. One of the most accomplished marksmen in Marine Corps history, with 103 confirmed eliminations in the Pacific Theater. His actions at Bougainville that are still taught as a case study in our sniper schools. The revelation washed over the assembled Marines like a physical wave. Mitchell's jaw literally dropped while Robert stood perfectly still, processing the implications of having just received personal instruction from a living legend. And that, Harrington continued, is only part of the story. A respectful silence fell over the assembled crowd at Camp Pendleton. General Harrington's revelation about Bill Harrison's identity had transformed the atmosphere from casual interest to profound reverence. Even the children in the audience seemed to sense the significance of the moment, their usual restlessness replaced by attentive stillness. The general placed a hand on Bill's shoulder, the gesture bridging the gap between formal military protocol and personal admiration. Lieutenant Harrison's marksmanship record remained classified for decades due to the nature of his operations. What wasn't classified, however, was his contribution to Marine Corps training and after the war. Bill's eyes remained fixed on the distant targets, as though seeing through them to another time and place. His weathered face revealed little, but those standing closest noticed the slight tightening around his eyes, the almost imperceptible straightening of his posture. For a man who had spent a lifetime avoiding recognition, this public acknowledgement clearly stirred complex emotions. Torres cleared his throat, professional discipline warring with genuine curiosity. Sir, would it be appropriate to continue our demonstration? We still have the accuracy competition scheduled. Harrington glanced at Bill, a questioning look in his eyes. Bill nodded once, a subtle gesture of consent. By all means, the general replied. In fact, I believe Lieutenant Harrison was in the process of giving your team some valuable instruction. Mitchell stepped in forward, his earlier defensiveness replaced by eager attentiveness. Sir, would you consider showing us your technique again? This time, perhaps you could talk us through your process. Bill's expression softened slightly, the corner of his mouth lifting in what might have been the beginning of a smile. The first thing to understand about marksmanship is that it's not about the shot. It's about everything that happens before the shot. The Marines gathered around Bill as he once again took up the Springfield. This time his movements were deliberately slower, educational rather than demonstrative. He explained each element of his technique, from stance to breath control, from sight picture to trigger squeeze. The young Marines listened with rapt attention, professionals recognizing mastery regardless of the era it represented. Watch how I distribute weight between my feet, Bill instructed, demonstrating the subtle balance that created a stable platform. Modern shooting tends to be too rigid, too mechanical. You need enough structure for stability, but enough flexibility to absorb recoil naturally. Robert studied Bill's stance, then attempted to replicate it. Like this, sir. Bill made a minor adjustment to her posture. Better. Feel how your body aligns more naturally with the rifle, that reduces fatigue during extended engagements. As Bill continued his impromptu masterclass, his mind drifted back to Okinawa again, to the rain-soaked ridge, where he'd made the shot that would eventually earn him the Medal of Honor. The memory emerged with crystalline clarity, as though it had happened yesterday rather than 8 decades ago. The Japanese forces had established a heavily fortified position overlooking the approach to a strategic airfield. 3 companies of Marines had attempted to advance only to be pinned down by interlocking fields of fire. Artillery couldn't reach the position due to the terrain, and air support was grounded by the severe weather. Captain James Harrington Sr., the general's father, had called Bill to his makeshift command post, rain pouring off both their helmets as they huddled over a mud-spattered map. Harrison, the captain, had said, his voice barely audible over the storm, "We're bleeding out here. That ridge is the key. If we can their observer, we might have a chance." Bill had studied the map, calculating distances and angles. "That's over 500 yards in driving rain and high winds, sir." The captain's eyes had been steady, understanding exactly what he was asking. "If anyone can make that shot, it's you." Bill and Jack Winters had crawled forward through mud so thick it threatened to pull the boots from their feet. The Japanese position was nestled in a natural rock formation, offering protection from everything except a precisely placed shot from a very specific angle. Reaching the shooting position had required 3 hours of painstaking movement. Every inch gained a victory against both the elements and enemy observation. When they finally reached the position, both men were soaked to the skin, their uniforms caked with mud. Jack set up the spotting scope while Bill prepared his rifle, methodically checking each component, despite fingers numbed by cold and rain. "Winds gusting to 20 knots right to left," Jack reported, squinting through the scope. "Rain's affecting visibility. Target position confirmed. I can just make out movement in the bunker opening." Bill settled into position, controlling his breathing despite the cold that had seeped into his bones. The rain pelted his helmet, rivulets of water streaming down his face. He wiped his eyes with a muddy sleeve and peered through the iron sights. "I'll need to adjust for drop and drift," he murmured, making mental calculations based on experience rather than ballistic tables. "Observers exposed," Jack whispered suddenly. "He's using binoculars, looking directly at Charlie Company's position." Bill exhaled slowly, feeling time stretch and slow around him. His focus narrowed to the front sight, the distant target, and the environmental conditions between them. The shot would need to account for significant bullet drop at this range, substantial windage, and the effect of heavy rain on the trajectory. When he squeezed the trigger, the rifle's report was almost lost in a crack of thunder. Through his sights, Bill saw the Japanese observer fall. Seconds later, the enemy machine guns fell silent as their fire direction was lost. "Hit," Jack confirmed, excitement breaking through his professional demeanor. "Center mass, target down." Captain Harrington had ordered the advance, immediately taking advantage of the momentary disruption. The Marines surged forward, gaining ground that had cost dozens of lives in previous attempts. The momentum of the entire battle had shifted on a single precisely placed shot. As they relocated to avoid counter-battery fire, the Japanese artillery had begun a desperate barrage. Jack had spotted the incoming shells, first shoving Bill into a shell, crater seconds before the area was saturated with explosions. When Bill regained his senses, he found Jack lying beside him, his body riddled with shrapnel. "Guess I zigged when I should have zagged," Jack had said, attempting a smile despite the pain etched on his features. Bill had applied pressure bandages, calling desperately for a corpsman. "Hold on, Jack. Help is coming." In the field hospital hours later, Jack had gripped Bill's hand with fading strength. "Promise me something," he'd whispered, his voice barely audible over the moans of the wounded. "What we learned out there, the skills, the knowledge, don't let it die with us." "I won't," Bill had promised, his voice thick with emotion. "I swear it." Jack's eyes had held Bill's for a long moment. Too many good men won't make it back to teach the next generation. It's on us, on you now, to make sure they're ready. Those had been Jack's final words. Bill had remained at his friend's side until the end, holding the hand of the man who had saved his life, carrying the weight of a promise that would shape the remainder of his days. Back at Camp Pendleton, Bill blinked away the memory, focusing once more on the young Marines gathered around him. He realized Torres had asked him a question. "I'm sorry," Bill said. "Could you repeat that?" "I asked about your follow-through technique, sir," Torres said. "You seem to maintain your position well after the shot breaks." Bill nodded, grateful for the return to the present. "The shot doesn't end when the trigger breaks. That's a common misconception. Your body needs to remain stable through the entire recoil cycle to ensure consistent accuracy." He demonstrated, showing how his entire body absorbed and controlled the rifle's movement. The Marines watched intently, several of them taking mental notes or quietly discussing specific elements of his technique. Mitchell attempted to replicate the stance and follow-through that Bill had demonstrated. His execution was technically sound, but still showed signs of the more rigid technology-dependent approach of modern training. "You're still fighting the rifle," Bill observed. "Try this." He stepped behind Mitchell and made several small adjustments to his position. "Relax your shoulders. Let the rifle become part of you rather than something you're controlling." Mitchell tried again, his movements more fluid this time. When he fired, the improvement was immediately apparent in both his comfort and accuracy. "That feels completely different," Mitchell admitted, genuine surprise in his voice. "More natural somehow." Bill smiled, the expression warming his weathered features. "That's because it is natural. Your body knows what to do if you get out of its way and let it work." As Bill continued to work with each Marine individually, General Harrington observed with quiet approval. Cooper stood at attention beside him, occasionally answering questions about how he had recognized Bill and made the call to headquarters. "I remembered his photograph from the Marine Corps Sniper School historical display, sir," Cooper explained. "The moment he mentioned Bougainville and Okinawa, I was almost certain." Harrington nodded. "Good initiative, Private. Lieutenant Harrison rarely appears at public events. Having him here is an opportunity these Marines will remember for their entire careers." The impromptu training session continued, with Bill addressing each Marine's individual technique. His corrections were precise and insightful, identifying subtle issues that even experienced instructors had missed. Despite the generation gap and vast technological differences, the fundamental principles of marksmanship remained unchanged. "The principles don't change," Bill explained as he helped Roberts adjust her breathing pattern. "Technology evolves, equipment improves, but the human element remains constant. Understanding that connection between body, mind, and rifle is what separates good shooters from great ones." By the time they moved to the firing line for another demonstration, the Marines' attitudes had transformed completely. The earlier skepticism had been replaced by genuine respect and eager attentiveness. They watched Bill's every move, studying his technique with the focus of professionals recognizing mastery. Bill settled into position behind the Springfield, his movements fluid and purposeful. "Watch my breathing pattern," he instructed. "I'll control my respiratory rate for 30 seconds before taking the shot." The Marines observed as Bill demonstrated the precise rhythm of controlled breathing, the subtle adjustments in his stance as he found his natural point of aim, and the almost imperceptible trigger squeeze that released the shot without disturbing his sight picture. The rifle cracked, and the distant steel target rang out almost simultaneously. Bill worked the bolt smoothly, chambering another round without breaking position. 4 more shots followed in measured succession, each finding its mark with unerring precision. "Perfect score again," Torres announced, unable to keep the admiration from his voice. Mitchell shook his head in disbelief. Sir, that level of consistency with iron sights at this distance, it's extraordinary. Bill lowered the rifle, clearing it before responding. It's not extraordinary. It's what any of you could achieve with proper training and enough practice under genuine pressure. Robert stepped forward, her expression thoughtful. Our current training emphasizes technology and standardized techniques. We spend hours with electronic simulators and computer-adjusted optics. Those are valuable tools, Bill acknowledged, but they're supplements to fundamental skills, not replacements for them. Torres nodded slowly, professional humility evident in his expression. I think we've been approaching this backward. We've been teaching Marines to use equipment rather than teaching them to shoot. The acknowledgement hung in the air, significant in its implications for how these Marines would approach their roles as instructors and leaders. General Harrington watched the exchange with interest, his presence lending weight to the moment. Lieutenant Harrison, the general said, stepping forward, would you consider conducting a more formal session with our marksmanship instructors? Your insights could be invaluable. Bill seemed momentarily taken aback by the request. For decades, he had shared his knowledge quietly working with selected Marines in unofficial capacities. This public recognition and formal invitation represented a significant change. Before Bill could respond, Cooper approached with a message for General Harrington. The general read it quickly, then turned back to the group. It appears we have a schedule adjustment, Harrington announced. The historical weapons demonstration has been extended to include a special presentation on the evolution of Marine Corps marksmanship techniques. The announcement drew appreciative murmurs from the crowd, who had been captivated by the unexpected exhibition of skill from the elderly veteran. Many had moved closer, forming a semicircle around the impromptu training session. Bill leaned slightly on his cane, the only visible indication that the extended activity might be taxing for a man of his years. Torres noticed immediately and gestured toward a nearby chair. Sir, would you like to sit for a moment? We can bring refreshments while the next display is prepared. Bill accepted with a graceful nod, settling into the chair with the careful movements of someone managing old injuries. As he sat, his hand unconsciously moved to his left knee, massaging it with a subtle circular motion. Mitchell noticed the gesture. Okinawa, sir, he asked quietly. Bill's eyes met Mitchell's, surprise briefly visible before understanding dawned. Good observation, Corporal. Yes, shrapnel from the same barrage that killed my spotter. The personal detail created a moment of connection between the veterans separated by nearly 7 decades. Mitchell nodded respectfully, recognizing the significance of what had been shared. As the Marines prepared for the continuation of the demonstration, Bill took the opportunity to observe them with a professional eye. Their movements had already begun to change, incorporating elements of what he had shown them. The transformation wasn't complete. Habits formed over years of training wouldn't change in a single afternoon, but the foundation had been laid. Roberts approached, offering a bottle of water. Sir, I have a question about something you mentioned earlier. You said real marksmanship is different from range shooting. Could you elaborate on that? Bill accepted the water gratefully, taking a measured sip before responding. Range shooting is predictable. Controlled conditions, known distances, no consequences for failure. Combat marksmanship is the opposite. Unpredictable conditions, estimated distances, and the highest possible stakes. He paused, considering how to convey the fundamental difference. On the range, a miss means a lower score. In combat, a miss might mean a dead Marine. That reality changes everything about how you approach the shot. Roberts listened intently, her expression thoughtful. Our training tries to simulate stress through physical exertion and time pressure, but it's not the same, is it? It can't be, Bill replied simply, and it shouldn't be. The goal isn't to recreate combat. The goal is to build skills so thoroughly that they withstand the chaos of combat. Their conversation was interrupted as Torres called the team back to the firing line. The next phase of the demonstration would compare traditional marksmanship techniques with modern approaches, highlighting both the evolution of the skill and the constants that remained unchanged. As Bill watched the Marines prepare, his mind drifted once more to the past, not to combat this time, but to the years that followed. After the war, he had returned home like millions of other veterans, carrying both visible and invisible scars. The promise made to Jack had stayed with him, shaping his decisions and ultimately his career. While officially working as a gunsmith in civilian life, Bill had maintained close connections with the Marine Corps. Several times a year, he would quietly visit bases around the country, sharing his knowledge with selected snipers and instructors. These informal sessions had never appeared in any official training manual, but their impact had rippled through generations of Marine marksmen. During the Korean War, Bill had trained snipers who would go on to set records for effectiveness in the mountainous terrain of the peninsula. His techniques for operating in jungle environments had saved countless lives. Through the Cold War and into the modern era, the skills he had learned in the crucible of the Pacific Campaign had been preserved and passed down, a living legacy that continued to evolve while remaining rooted in fundamental truths. "Lieutenant Harrison," General Harrington said, interrupting Bill's reflections, "would you share with these Marines and our audience how your experiences shaped Marine Corps marksmanship doctrine after the war?" Bill shifted slightly in his chair, uncomfortable with being the center of attention, but recognizing the importance of the moment. These were not just war stories for entertainment. This was the preservation and transmission of hard-earned knowledge. After the war, Bill began, his voice strengthening as he spoke. Many of us who had served as marksmen recognized that the skills we developed needed to be preserved. The official training programs were good, but they couldn't capture everything we'd learned under fire. The crowd had grown silent spectators, and Marines alike listening intently to the first-hand account of marksmanship history. "We created what you might call an unofficial network," Bill continued, "veteran marksmen connecting with the new generation, passing down not just techniques, but understanding. Not just how, but why. The official manuals could tell you where to place your feet, how to align the sights, when to squeeze the trigger. What they couldn't convey was the integration of those elements, the feeling of rightness when everything aligns." Torres nodded in recognition. "The intangibles that can't be quantified or standardized." "Exactly," Bill confirmed. "You can teach anyone to shoot accurately in ideal conditions given enough time. Teaching them to maintain that accuracy when exhausted, frightened under fire in driving rain or blinding sun, that requires something more." As Bill spoke, Mitchell and Roberts exchanged glances, a new understanding passing between them. Their training had emphasized technological solutions and standardized approaches seeking to minimize variables in human factors. What Bill described was the opposite, embracing the human element and developing it to its fullest potential. Sir, Mitchell asked, "How did you maintain these skills after the war without the pressure of combat?" The question revealed a genuine concern that many professional warriors faced: how to ensure their abilities remain sharp when not regularly tested under genuine stress. Bill's answer surprised them. "I never stopped teaching," he said simply. "Every 5 years or so, a Marine Corps officer would appear at my shop. Very discreet, very respectful. They'd explain that they had snipers preparing for deployment who could benefit from some additional perspective. I'd close the shop for a week, and we'd go to work." Bill smiled at the memory, the decades of quiet service after his official military career had ended. Teaching forces you to analyze and articulate what you know instinctively. Each generation of Marines brought new questions, new challenges. Adapting my knowledge to their needs kept everything fresh and relevant. General Harrington stepped forward, adding context to Bill's modest account. "What Lieutenant Harrison isn't telling you is that his unofficial training program evolved into what he eventually became the formal Scout Sniper School curriculum. His fingerprints are all over our doctrine, though you won't find his name in the manuals." The revelation clearly surprised Torres and his team. They exchanged glances, suddenly recognizing elements of their own training that had originated with the elderly veteran sitting before them. "The fundamentals you've been practicing your entire careers," Harrington continued. "The emphasis on mental discipline, on the integration of body and weapon, on adaptability under stress. Those principles were articulated and codified by Harrison and his contemporaries." Bill shook his head, slightly uncomfortable with the credit being given. "We just did what needed doing, General. The knowledge was too valuable to lose." The humility in his response resonated with the Marines. It reflected a generational characteristic they recognized from their own mentors and senior leaders: the quiet professionalism that valued results over recognition. As the formal demonstration resumed, Torres invited Bill to provide commentary explaining the historical context of various techniques as they were demonstrated. The contrast between old and new approaches became a conversation rather than a competition, highlighting both the evolution of the skill and the constants that remained unchanged. Bill observed each Marine's performance with a professional eye, offering brief corrections or affirmations. His guidance was precise and insightful, identifying subtle issues that even experienced instructors had missed. The young Marines absorbed his instruction, eagerly recognizing the rare opportunity they had been given. When Mitchell took his position on the firing line, his approach had visibly changed. His stance incorporated elements of what Bill had shown him, more fluid and natural than his earlier rigid posture. When he fired, the improvement was immediately apparent in both his comfort and accuracy. 5 for 5, Torres announced as the targets registered perfect hits. Mitchell turned, unable to suppress his smile as Bill nodded in approval. Roberts followed with similar results, her technique likewise transformed by the afternoon's instruction. One by one, each Marine demonstrated the impact of Bill's coaching, their performance elevated by principles developed decades before any of them were born. As the demonstration concluded, the crowd erupted in applause. Bill acknowledged their appreciation with a modest nod, uncomfortable with the attention, but recognizing the significance of the moment. This wasn't about him personally. It was about the transmission of knowledge, the preservation of skills that had been purchased at tremendous cost. General Harrington stepped forward, addressing the assembled spectators. What you've witnessed today is more than a shooting exhibition. It's the living embodiment of the Marine Corps' commitment to preserving and honoring our heritage while constantly evolving to meet future challenges. The formal conclusion of the event didn't end the interactions between Bill and the Marines. As the crowd began to disperse, Torres approached with a request that clearly meant a great deal to him personally. "Lieutenant Harrison," Torres said, his tone respectful but eager, "my team and I would be honored if you would consider conducting a more extended training session with us. We have access to the full-range facilities for the next 3 days." Bill hesitated, glancing at his cane and then at the expectant faces of the young Marines. His expression revealed the internal conflict, the physical limitations of age versus the opportunity to fulfill the promise made decades ago on a rain-soaked battlefield. Before he could respond, General Harrington joined the conversation. "I've taken the liberty of making some arrangements, Lieutenant. We have quarters prepared for you on base if you'd like to stay. Medical support is available if needed, and of course, everything can be adjusted to accommodate your schedule." The consideration behind the offer was evident: respect for Bill's age and potential limitations, while creating the opportunity for his knowledge to be shared more extensively. Bill's expression softened as he recognized the chance to honor his promise to Jack in a more meaningful way than he had anticipated. "I'd be honored, General," Bill replied, his decision made. "On one condition." "Name it," Harrington responded immediately. Bill gestured toward the Springfield rifle. "I'd like to use that rifle for the training. There are some lessons that can only be properly demonstrated with the tools we used back then." Harrington smiled, understanding the request perfectly. "Consider it done. The museum curator might have a fit, but I think we can manage." As arrangements were made for the extended training session, Cooper approached Bill with a question that had clearly been on his mind throughout the afternoon. "Sir," Cooper said, his tone respectful but curious, "how did you maintain such precision after all these years? Most of us struggle to maintain peak skills, even with regular practice." Bill considered the young Marine thoughtfully before responding. "The body remembers what the mind practices with intention. I haven't fired a rifle in combat for 75 years, but I've never stopped practicing the fundamentals. The breathing, the focus, the mental discipline." He tapped his temple with a weathered finger. "Marksmanship happens here first. The actual shot is just the final expression of what you've already accomplished in your mind." Cooper nodded slowly, absorbing the wisdom. "That's not something our training emphasizes enough." "Perhaps that's something we can address in the coming days," Bill suggested, a hint of a smile softening his features. As the range was cleared and preparations made for the following day's activities, Bill found himself seated in the officers' mess, sharing a meal with General Harrington. The conversation had turned to the changes in warfare over the decades and the constants that remain despite technological evolution. "The tools change," Bill observed, cutting his steak with precise movements. "The fundamentals don't. Whether it's a Springfield or whatever space-age rifle your Marines are using now, the human behind it still needs to breathe, focus, and execute." Harrington nodded in agreement. "That's precisely why your perspective is so valuable, Lieutenant. We've become perhaps too enamored with technological solutions. Your demonstration today was a powerful reminder of what the human element brings to the equation. Bill's expression grew thoughtful. Your father understood that. After Okinawa, when we were preparing for the invasion of the Japanese mainland, he insisted that his men master the basics before touching any specialized equipment. Saved a lot of lives in the smaller operations before the war ended. The mention of his father caught Harrington's attention. You knew him well. Well enough, Bill replied. Good officer, cared about his men, understood the difference between taking a hill and holding it. Harrington smiled at the simple but profound assessment. He spoke of you, you know. Not often, he wasn't one to tell war stories, but occasionally he'd mention Harrison the marksman when discussing leadership principles. Bill raised an eyebrow in surprise. I wasn't an officer until very late in the war, just a sergeant trying to keep his men alive. And that, Harrington said, raising his glass in a subtle toast, is precisely why he respected you. Leadership isn't about rank, it's about taking responsibility and developing those under your guidance. The conversation continued as they finished their meal, bridging the decades between their experiences, yet finding common ground in the unchanging principles of combat leadership and the development of martial skills. As evening fell over Camp Pendleton, Bill found himself standing at the window of his assigned quarters, gazing out at the training grounds, illuminated by security lighting. In the distance, he could see Marines moving about on evening duties, their posture and bearing distinctive even at a distance. His thoughts returned to Jack Winters and the promise made in that field hospital. I kept my word, Jack, he whispered to the memory of his friend. The skills didn't die with us. They live on in every Marine who peers through sights and measures their breath before the shot. The next morning dawned clear and cool, perfect conditions for marksmanship training. Bill arrived at the range to find Torres and his team already preparing the area, setting up targets and organizing equipment. Their efficiency and attention to detail spoke of professionals taking their craft seriously. Good morning, Lieutenant. Torres greeted Bill with a respectful nod. We've prepared everything according to your specifications. The Springfield has been inspected and approved for use. Bill nodded in appreciation, his eyes scanning the range with a professional assessment. Excellent work, Staff Sergeant. Let's begin with a demonstration of the fundamentals, then work with each Marine individually. As the Marines gathered around, Bill began his instruction with the same words his own mentor had used nearly 8 decades earlier on a training range in San Diego. Marksmanship isn't about hitting targets. It's about understanding yourself, your weapon, and the space between you and your objective. Master that understanding and the hits will follow. The young Marines listened attentively. Professional warriors recognizing wisdom that transcended generations and technology. As Bill demonstrated the first principles of breath control and natural point of aim, the transmission of knowledge that had begun on distant battlefields continued, preserving skills that had been purchased at tremendous cost and ensuring they would not fade with the passing of time. Torres watched with growing appreciation as Bill worked with each Marine, identifying and correcting subtle flaws in technique that their modern training had overlooked or de-emphasized. The impact was immediate and undeniable, their performance improving visibly with each adjustment. We've been missing something fundamental in our approach, Torres commented quietly to General Harrington, who had returned to observe the training. All our technology and advanced techniques, and we've somehow lost touch with the basics. Harrington nodded thoughtfully. That's why this encounter is so valuable. It's a course correction for our entire marksmanship program. As the morning progressed, Bill's instruction moved beyond technical aspects to address the mental discipline that distinguished truly exceptional marksmen. He spoke of focus, of the ability to maintain clarity under pressure, of the integration of body and weapon into a single harmonious system. The difference between good and great, Bill explained, isn't found in equipment or even in technique. It's found in the ability to remain calm and execute perfectly when everything around you is chaos. The Marines absorbed his wisdom, eagerly recognizing the rare opportunity they had been given to learn from living history. What had begun as a chance encounter had transformed into a masterclass that would influence their approach to marksmanship for the remainder of their careers. And as Bill Harrison guided another generation of Marines in the skills he had learned in the crucible of combat, the promise made to a dying friend on a distant battlefield was fulfilled once more. The knowledge would continue passed from hand to hand, ensuring that the sacrifices of the past would serve the warriors of the future, an unbroken chain of skill and understanding that would never fade with time. The final day of training dawned with a certain solemnity, a shared understanding among all present that they were participating in something rare and precious. Bill Harrison arrived at the range earlier than scheduled, moving with deliberate steps that belied his 90 years. The morning light caught the polished wood of the Springfield rifle he carried, casting warm highlights across the aged walnut stock. Staff Sergeant Torres was already there preparing the range with meticulous attention to detail. He straightened to attention when he noticed Bill offering a crisp salute that acknowledged not rank but profound respect. "Good morning, Lieutenant," Torres said as Bill returned the salute. "The team will be arriving shortly. We've set everything up according to your specifications." Bill nodded in appreciation, his weathered hands cradling the Springfield with familiar ease. "Thank you, Staff Sergeant. I believe today we should focus on the integration of what we've covered. Theory becomes valuable only when applied under pressure." Torres smiled, recognizing the wisdom in the approach. "I've arranged for some challenging drills that should test everything you've taught us." They walked together along the firing line, discussing the day's program in the companionable manner of professionals who shared a deep respect for their craft. Despite the decades separating their service, the fundamental language of marksmanship created a bridge between them, transcending technological evolution and generational differences. As they talked, Bill's mind drifted briefly to his final conversation with Jack Winters in that field hospital on Okinawa. The promise he had made seemed to echo across the decades, giving particular significance to this unexpected opportunity to share his knowledge. "Your spotter," Torres said, interrupting Bill's thoughts with uncanny timing. "You mentioned him yesterday." "Winters wasn't it." Bill nodded, surprised by the sudden tightness in his throat. After all these years, the memory of Jack still carried emotional weight. "Jack Winters, best spotter I ever worked with, saved my life on Okinawa." Torres seemed to sense the significance behind the simple statement. "If you don't mind my asking, sir, what happened?" Bill paused, gazing out across the range to the distant targets. For a moment he was seeing not paper silhouettes, but the rain-soaked ridge of Okinawa, hearing not the morning birds, but the thunder of artillery. "We'd completed a critical mission," Bill began, his voice steady despite the emotion beneath it. "Eliminated a Japanese observer who was directing fire on our advancing companies. The shot changed the course of the battle, allowed our men to secure a strategic position." He paused, his hand unconsciously moving to the faded scar on his left forearm. "As we relocated, the Japanese began a counter-barrage. Jack saw it coming before I did. He pushed me into a shell crater, took the shrapnel that would have killed me." In the simple account contained volumes of unspoken meaning. The instantaneous decision made by one warrior to sacrifice himself for another, the burden of survival carried by the one saved the promise that gave purpose to that survival. "In the field hospital before he died, Jack made me promise that what we'd learned wouldn't die with us," Bill continued. "Too many good men wouldn't be coming home to teach the next generation. He made me promise to carry those lessons forward." Torres nodded slowly, understanding the weight of such a promise and recognizing that he and his Marines were now part of its fulfillment. "That's why this matters so much," Bill concluded, gesturing toward the range where they would soon continue the training. "Not for my sake, but for Jack's, for all of them who never came home to pass on what they learned." Before Torres could respond, they heard the approach of vehicles as the rest of the team arrived for the day's training. The personal moment receded as professional focus returned, but something had shifted in the relationship between the elderly veteran and the staff sergeant, a deeper understanding of the continuity they represented. The Marines assembled quickly, their bearing, reflecting both military discipline and genuine enthusiasm for the day's instruction. Mitchell and Roberts stood at the front, notebooks in hand, ready to record any insights from their elderly mentor. Cooper maintained his customary position slightly apart from the group, observing everything with quiet attentiveness. General Harrington arrived as Bill was beginning his instruction, accompanied by several senior officers who had requested permission to observe. Their presence elevated the significance of the session, transforming it from an impromptu training opportunity into something approaching an official revision of doctrine. "Today we integrate everything we've covered," Bill announced, addressing the assembled Marines. "Marksmanship isn't a collection of separate skills. It's a unified system where every element affects every other element. Stance influences breathing, breathing affects trigger, control, impacts, follow-through, and all of it together determines accuracy. He gestured toward the Springfield resting on the table beside him. This rifle was manufactured in 1940. The design is essentially the same as rifles used in the First World War. By modern standards, it's primitive technology. Yet in capable hands, it remains devastatingly effective at ranges that would challenge your most advanced systems. The point landed precisely as intended. Technology evolves, but fundamentals remain constant. The Marines nodded in understanding their perspectives significantly altered by the previous day's experiences. We'll begin with a practical demonstration, Bill continued. Staff Sergeant Torres has prepared a series of challenges that will test your application of the principles we've covered. I'll observe and provide guidance as needed. The training proceeded with professional intensity, each Marine approaching the firing line with renewed focus and improved technique. Bill moved among them, offering quiet correction or approval as warranted. His instructions were precise and insightful, identifying subtle issues that even experienced instructors had overlooked. Mitchell demonstrated particularly dramatic improvement, his previously rigid approach replaced by fluid movement and natural integration with his weapon. When he completed his course of fire with perfect results, his expression revealed both pride and humility. Recognition of achievement balanced with awareness of how much more there was to learn. "Well done, Corporal." Bill acknowledged his sparse praise carrying a significant weight. "You've stopped fighting the rifle and started working with it." Mitchell nodded in appreciation of both the compliment and its accuracy. "It feels completely different now, sir, like the rifle is an extension rather than a tool." "That's exactly right," Bill confirmed. "That relationship between marksman and weapon is what allows for consistency under stress. When the integration is complete, the shot becomes almost inevitable, a natural conclusion rather than a forced action." Roberts approached the firing line next, her movements reflecting the adjustments Bill had suggested during previous sessions. Her breathing pattern had changed subtly, becoming more rhythmic and controlled. When she fired, the improvement was immediately evident, not just in accuracy but in the fluid consistency of her entire performance. "Your follow-through has improved significantly," Bill noted as she completed her course. "You're staying connected through the entire shot process now." Roberts nodded, her expression revealing the professional satisfaction of mastering an aspect of her craft. "I've been focusing on maintaining that connection even after the shot breaks. It makes a significant difference in consistency." Throughout the morning, each Marine demonstrated similar improvements, their performance elevated by principles developed decades before any of them were born. The senior officers observing the training exchanged significant glances, recognizing the implications for current doctrine and training methodologies. As they broke for lunch, General Harrington approached Bill, his expression reflecting both respect and professional interest. "Lieutenant Harrison, your impact on these Marines in just 3 days has been remarkable. I'd like to discuss the possibility of capturing this instruction more formally, perhaps through a series of recorded sessions or a specialized training manual." Bill considered the proposal thoughtfully. Throughout his life, he had preferred to work quietly, passing his knowledge directly to selected individuals rather than seeking broader recognition. Yet he recognized the opportunity being presented, a chance to fulfill his promise to Jack on a scale he had never anticipated. "I'd be willing to consider it, General," Bill replied carefully, "though I'd want to ensure the focus remains on the principles rather than the instructor. This isn't about me or my experiences. It's about preserving knowledge that was purchased at tremendous cost." Harrington nodded in understanding. "Absolutely. The emphasis would be entirely on the instructional content. We can discuss the details later if you're amenable." As they rejoined the group for the afternoon session, Bill noticed a subtle change in the atmosphere. Word of his instruction had spread throughout the base, attracting additional observers from various units. The semicircle of Marines had grown now, including snipers and marksmanship instructors from other companies eager to learn from the living legend. The afternoon's training shifted focus from individual skills to the mental aspects of precision shooting under stress. Bill had Torres arrange a series of time challenges with artificial stressors, physical exertion before firing, uncomfortable positions, distractions during the shot process. "Combat doesn't give you perfect conditions," Bill explained, as the Marines prepared for the drills. You'll be tired, uncomfortable, distracted by 1,000 concerns beyond the shot itself. Mastery isn't demonstrated on a calm range with all variables controlled. It's proven when everything is working against you. Mitchell was the first to attempt the stress course, beginning with 50 push-ups before sprinting to the firing position. With elevated heart rate and labored breathing, he was instructed to engage 5 targets within a limited time window. Despite the physical stress, his performance remained remarkably consistent, evidence that the fundamentals had truly been internalized. The body will always be affected by stress, Bill observed as Mitchell completed his course. The key is preventing that stress from disturbing the essential elements of your technique. Your breathing pattern remained consistent despite the elevated heart rate. That's exactly what we're looking for. Each Marine faced similar challenges, their performance tested under increasingly demanding conditions. Throughout the afternoon, Bill provided guidance that addressed not just technique, but the mental discipline required to maintain that technique under pressure. Focused networking is both an asset and a liability, he explained during one demonstration. Under stress, your attention naturally narrows to essential elements, which can improve shot execution but reduce situational awareness. Learning to control that focus to expand and contract it as needed is a critical skill for combat marksmanship. As the day progressed, the instruction moved beyond technical aspects to address the ethical and psychological dimensions of precision shooting in combat environments. Bill spoke from experience, addressing realities that training manuals often sanitized or overlooked entirely. Taking a life changes you, he stated simply, his voice carrying the weight of first-hand knowledge. There's no avoiding that truth. What matters is understanding that change, integrating it into your awareness without allowing it to compromise your judgment or effectiveness. The Marines listened in respectful silence, recognizing they were receiving insights that could not be found in any official training program. The distilled wisdom of someone who had faced the harshest realities of combat and emerged with both skill and humanity intact. The technical aspects of marksmanship are important, Bill continued, but ultimately secondary. The primary requirement for excellence in this field is moral clarity, absolute certainty about when to take the shot and when to hold it. Without that foundation, all the skill in the world becomes meaningless, or worse, dangerous. As the afternoon session concluded, Torres gathered his team for a final exercise, a collaborative challenge that required them to work together, applying everything they had learned over the previous days. The scenario involved at multiple targets at varying distances with complications that demanded communication and coordinated response. Bill observed from a slight distance, allowing Torres to lead the exercise while providing occasional guidance. The Marines performed admirably, their individual improvements magnified by their enhanced ability to work as an integrated unit. When the final target was successfully engaged, spontaneous applause broke out among the observers who had gathered to watch the demonstration. Torres approached Bill as his team secured their equipment, professional pride evident in his bearing. "Your instruction has transformed our capabilities, sir. I can't adequately express our gratitude." Bill nodded in acknowledgement, his expression revealing satisfaction with their progress. "You had the foundations already, Staff Sergeant. All I did was help you recognize them beneath the technological overlay." As the formal training concluded, General Harrington addressed the assembled Marines, his voice carrying the authority of his position and the conviction of personal belief. "What you've witnessed and participated in these past 3 days represents a valuable course correction for our marksmanship program," Harrington stated. "Lieutenant Harrison has reminded us of something essential, that while technology advances the human elements of precision, shooting remained constant across generations. The fundamentals he has demonstrated were purchased with blood and sacrifice in the Pacific Campaign, proven effective through decades of conflict, and remain as vital today as they were in 1945. The general turned to Bill, rendering a perfect salute that was immediately echoed by every Marine present. "On behalf of the Corps, Lieutenant Harrison, I thank you for your service, both in war and in peace, both on the battlefield and on the training range. The knowledge you've preserved and passed down has saved countless lives and will continue to do so for generations to come." Bill returned the salute with the same precision he had demonstrated in every aspect of his instruction, his weathered face revealing momentary emotion before returning to its customary composed expression. As the formal ceremony concluded and the Marines began to disperse, Mitchell approached Bill with a question that clearly held personal significance. "Sir," Mitchell began, his tone respectful but earnest. "You mentioned yesterday that after the war you continued to train selected Marines unofficially. How did that work exactly? Was it organized through official channels?" Bill smiled slightly, appreciating the young corporal's curiosity. "Nothing so formal. Word spread among certain circles that if you needed specialized instruction, particularly for difficult deployments, there was an old Marine in Arizona who might be able to help. Commanders who understood the value of traditional skills would send their people to me when official training programs couldn't provide what they needed." Mitchell nodded thoughtfully. "A parallel system of knowledge transmission outside the official doctrine, but supported by those who recognized its value." "That's a good way to put it," Bill agreed. "Official doctrine has necessary limitations. It has to be standardized, documentable, defensible. Some knowledge can only be passed directly person to person. Both systems have their place." As Bill prepared to depart, General Harrington approached with a small group of officers, including the base commander and the head of the Scouts Sniper School. Lieutenant Harrison and Harrington said, "We've been discussing how best to integrate your instruction into our training programs. With your permission, we'd like to establish a specialized course module based on the principles you've demonstrated these past few days." Bill considered the proposal, aware of both its potential value and its personal significance. Throughout his life after the war, he had worked quietly, passing his knowledge to selected individuals without seeking recognition. This official acknowledgement represented a fundamental shift, bringing into the open what had long operated in the shadows. "I think that would honor the intent of what we've done here," Bill replied carefully, "though I'd prefer the focus remain on the principles rather than the personality. This isn't about me, it's about preserving knowledge that was earned at tremendous cost." Harrington nodded in understanding. "Absolutely. We were thinking of calling it the Fundamental Integration Program, emphasizing the core concept you've demonstrated of unifying technical skills with mental discipline and ethical judgment." The conversation continued, discussing practical aspects of curriculum development and implementation. Throughout, Bill maintained his characteristic humility, redirecting attention from his personal contributions to the underlying principles that had proven their value across generations of conflict. As evening approached, Torres organized a small informal gathering in the officers' mess, a dinner to honor Bill's contribution and mark the conclusion of his instruction. The attendees included the Marines who had participated in the training, along with the selected officers who had observed the sessions. The atmosphere was warm but professional, reflecting the unique relationship that had developed between the elderly veteran and the young Marines he had mentored. Midway through the meal, Torres rose to offer a toast, his expression revealing genuine emotion beneath his professional composure. "To Lieutenant William Harrison," Torres began, raising his glass, "who reminded us that true mastery isn't found in equipment or technology, but in the unchanging fundamentals of our craft. And to those who never returned to pass on what they learned, we carry their knowledge forward." The toast resonated deeply with Bill, acknowledging not just his own contribution, but the promise that had motivated it, the pledge to Jack Winters and all those who had purchased wisdom with sacrifice. He raised his glass in acknowledgement, his usual reserve softened by the evident sincerity of the gesture. As the evening progressed, the conversation flowed naturally between professional discussion and personal connection. The Marines shared stories from their deployments, seeking Bill's perspective on challenges they had faced in various operational environments. Bill responded with insights drawn from both his wartime experience and his decades of unofficial instruction, creating bridges between generations of warriors separated by time, but united by shared purpose. Cooper, who had remained somewhat reserved throughout the training, finally approached Bill with a question that revealed the depth of his observation. "Sir," Cooper said quietly, "I've noticed something about your instruction that differs from our standard training. You never separate technical skills from ethical considerations. They're always integrated in your teaching. Is that deliberate?" Bill nodded, pleased by the perceptive observation. "Absolutely. The moment you separate the how from the why, you create dangerous fragmentation. Technical proficiency without ethical foundation creates efficient killers without moral compass. Ethical understanding without technical mastery creates well-intentioned ineffectiveness. Both are failures in different directions." Cooper absorbed the insight with thoughtful attention. Our training tends to compartmentalize, marksmanship in one module, ethics in ROE in another. I can see now how that might create artificial separation. The integration happens in combat regardless, Bill replied. Better to train as you'll fight with every aspect connected and considered. As the evening concluded, General Harrington approached with a small wooden box. Lieutenant Harrison, we have something for you. It's not an official award, nothing so formal, just a token of appreciation from the Marines you've instructed. Bill accepted the box with a questioning look. Opening it, he found a Silver Star medal. Not a new one, but a weathered decoration that had clearly been earned and worn. This belonged to my father, Harrington explained quietly. He received it for actions at Okinawa, actions that were possible because of the mission you and Jack Winters completed. He always said he owed his life and the lives of his men to that damn good shot Harrison. He'd want you to have it. Bill stared at the medal, momentarily overcome by the unexpected connection across decades. His hand closed gently around the decoration, feeling the weight of its significance. I'm honored, General, Bill said finally, his voice steady despite the emotion evident in his eyes. Truly honored. The following morning, preparations were made for Bill's departure from Camp Pendleton. His instruction complete, he would return to his quiet life in Arizona, though with the understanding that his knowledge would continue to influence Marine Corps marksmanship through the program being developed based on his teachings. Before leaving, Bill requested one final visit to the range where it had all begun just days earlier. Torres accompanied him, the two men walking in companionable silence through the early morning mist that shrouded the training grounds. At Bill's request, the Springfield rifle had been prepared for one final demonstration. As they reached the firing line, Bill took up the weapon with the same fluid grace he had exhibited throughout his instruction, settling into position with movements honed by decades of practice. One last shot, Bill said quietly, for Jack. Torres nodded in understanding, stepping back to give Bill space while remaining close enough to observe. The target stood at 500 yards, a challenging distance, with iron sights in the early morning conditions. Bill's focus narrowed to the essential elements: breath control, sight alignment, trigger discipline. His awareness expanded to include the subtle crosswind, the quality of morning light, the perfect stillness required for precision at distance. Every principle he had taught over the previous days merged into a single unified action as he exhaled smoothly and released the shot. The rifle cracked, the sound echoing across the empty range. A moment later, the distant ping confirmed a perfect hit. Bill lowered the Springfield, a sense of completion evident in his expression. He cleared the weapon with practiced efficiency before handing it to Torres. The fundamentals never change, Bill said simply. Technology evolves, equipment improves, but the core principles remain constant. Remember that when the next innovation comes along, promising to replace skill with automation. Torres nodded, accepting both the rifle and the wisdom it represented. We will, sir. What you've taught us will become part of our DNA as instructors. As they walked back toward the base, Bill's thoughts returned once more to that rainy day on Okinawa, to Jack Winters, and the promise made in a field hospital. The circle had closed somehow, the knowledge preserved and transmitted across decades, the skills forged in combat, ensuring they would never fade with the passing of time. 6 months later, Staff Sergeant Torres stood before a class of new Scout Sniper School students, his bearing reflecting both military discipline and the deeper understanding gained from his experience with Bill Harrison. Before we begin with equipment and techniques, Torres addressed the class. I want to establish our fundamental approach. Marksmanship isn't about hitting targets. It's about understanding yourself, your weapon, and the space between you and your objective. Master that understanding, and the hits will follow. The words were Bill's, though Torres didn't attribute them directly. They had become part of the doctrine, now incorporated into the new fundamental integration program that had been established following Bill's visit to Camp Pendleton. On the wall behind Torres hung a framed quote that captured the essence of Bill's instruction. Your equipment is only as good as your fundamentals, and your fundamentals are only as strong as your understanding. Technology can help you shoot, but only experience can teach you to fight. The classroom looked much like any other at the Scout Sniper School, with one notable addition. In a display case near the entrance stood a Springfield M1903 rifle, the same weapon Bill Harrison had used in his demonstration. A small plaque identified it as a teaching aid for the Fundamental Integration Program, ensuring that future generations of Marine snipers would maintain connection with the traditions and knowledge of their predecessors. Corporal Mitchell, now assigned as an instructor at the school, entered the classroom carrying training materials for the day's session. His promotion had come with a special assignment to help implement the new program, translating Bill's principles into structured curriculum that would preserve the wisdom without losing its essential character. "Ready to begin, Staff Sergeant?" Mitchell asked, noting the new student's attentive expressions. Torres nodded, his professional demeanor not quite concealing his enthusiasm for the revised approach. "Absolutely. I think these Marines are about to learn that some skills never truly fade. They only get sharper with time." In Arizona, Bill Harrison sat on the porch of his modest home watching the sunset paint the desert landscape in gold and crimson. A letter lay open on the table beside him, correspondence from General Nick Arrington updating him on the implementation of the Fundamental Integration Program and its initial success. Bill smiled, slightly satisfaction warming his weathered features. The knowledge preserved, the skills transmitted, the promise kept. Jack Winters would have approved. As twilight deepened into night, Bill's thoughts drifted across the decades to distant battlefields where young men had learned hard lessons that would echo through generations. The faces of those who had not returned remained clear in his memory. Jack Winters and so many others whose sacrifices had purchased wisdom that continued to save lives long after they were gone. "The circle closes, Jack," Bill murmured to the memory of his friend. "The skills live on." Miles away at Camp Pendleton, a new generation of Marines prepared for the challenges of an uncertain future, their training now enriched by principles that had proven their value across 8 decades of conflict. The technology had evolved beyond anything Bill Harrison might have imagined during his service in the Pacific Campaign, but the fundamentals remained unchanged. Breath control, mental discipline, the integration of marksman and weapon into a unified system capable of extraordinary precision under the most demanding conditions. And as young Marines learned these principles, incorporating them into their own understanding and practice, they became part of an unbroken chain stretching back through generations of warriors, a living testament to the enduring truth that some skills properly forged in the crucible of experience and passed down with faithful attention to their essence never truly fade with the time. They only grow sharper, more refined, and more valuable with each new generation that embraces them. In this continuity of knowledge, in this faithful transmission of hard-won wisdom, the true memorial to Bill Harrison and Jack Winters and countless others took shape, not in stone or metal, but in the living practice of their principles, ensuring that their sacrifice and skill would continue to serve the warriors of the future for generations yet to come.